The ballroom was alive with energy, an ocean of laughter, clinking glasses, and chatter that echoed against the polished marble floors. David Harrington stood at the center, effortlessly holding court. He was a tall, commanding figure, his sharp blue suit tailored to perfection, his presence undeniable. His smile was polished, yet something in his eyes hinted at an unease that no one had ever seen before. David had everything most men dreamed of. He had wealth, more than he could ever spend, and influence that reached into every corner of the city. People adored him. They admired him. And for years, he had carefully cultivated an image of the perfect businessman, the perfect husband, the perfect man. But tonight, even with all his wealth, his status, and his carefully crafted persona, David felt a sense of dread gnawing at him. Something was wrong. Jenna stood beside him, the woman who had been his secret for months. She was beautiful, with raven black hair cascading in waves over her bare shoulders, and a body that seemed to stop conversations wherever she went. But beneath the surface, there was more to her than just a pretty face. Jenna had her own ambitions, her own desires. And now, as the night progressed, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different. She had been at David's side through countless extravagant parties, luxury dinners, and quiet getaways. She had seen his carefully constructed life from every angle, but tonight, something was different. There was a tension in the air, a palpable sense of something shifting. The moment they had arrived at the party, Jenna had noticed how David's behavior had changed. He was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. She had expected him to be the center of attention, as he always was, making jokes, charming the crowd, leading the conversation. But instead, he had been scanning the room, his eyes darting from one guest to the next. Jenna had wondered if perhaps she was imagining things, but there was no denying it, something was off. They mingled, as they always did, with David giving his trademark smile to everyone, but Jenna felt the unease grow. She was used to being the center of attention, but tonight, she felt like a shadow beside David. As the evening wore on, her anxiety grew. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her. It was when David raised his glass for a toast that the first true crack in his composure appeared. "To new beginnings," David said, his voice steady, but there was a slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his glass of champagne. The crowd cheered, their voices rising in excitement. But Jenna caught the brief flash of panic that crossed David's face, quickly masked by a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Before Jenna could ask if he was all right, David's phone buzzed sharply against the marble table. His eyes flickered to it, a momentary look of alarm flashing across his face. It was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, but Jenna had seen it. "Excuse me," David murmured, his voice tight. "I'll be right back." He moved toward the back of the room, disappearing behind a velvet curtain that separated the ballroom from the rest of the mansion. Jenna watched him go, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the tension building. She turned back to the crowd, trying to force a smile and appear as if everything was fine. But the truth was, Jenna wasn't convinced. There was something lurking in the shadows, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was coming for them. Moments later, David returned, but his face was different. The smile was gone. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for something, or someone. Jenna had never seen him like this before. It was as if the man she had known was slipping away, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. She watched as David's gaze landed on the entrance to the ballroom, his expression shifting from concern to what could only be described as fear. And then, the door opened. The room fell silent. The woman who walked in was tall, poised, and carried herself with an elegance that seemed to freeze time. Her dark hair was swept up into an intricate bun, and her black dress clung to her form in a way that made her impossible to ignore. But it wasn't her beauty that commanded attention. It was the man standing behind her. The man was older than most of the guests, but his presence was undeniable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that seemed to belong to another time, handsome, but rugged, as if life had carved its mark into him. He looked out of place in the glittering ballroom, as if he had been plucked from a world of power and secrecy that no one here could even begin to understand. The woman was Sarah, David's wife. But tonight, she was not the same woman who had attended parties with him for years. There was something different in her eyes. Something knowing. Something that made the room feel colder. As Sarah entered, she scanned the room, her eyes briefly flicking to David before moving across the crowd. She was looking for him. But not just any man. She was looking for someone specific. And when her eyes landed on him, Jenna's blood ran cold. David. For a long moment, Sarah didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, the air thick with tension, as if she were letting everyone feel the weight of her presence. But what happened next shattered any illusion of control that David had so carefully maintained. "David," Sarah said, her voice calm, but the edge of authority in it made the hairs on the back of Jenna's neck stand up. David took a step toward her, his body rigid, his face pale. "Sarah," he managed to say, his voice faltering for the first time all evening. "I think it's time we talked," Sarah said, her gaze never leaving his. Then she stepped aside, revealing the man standing behind her. Jenna's heart skipped a beat when she saw the stranger's face. It was the CEO. The CEO of the company David had spent years building. The company that had made him the man he was today. The company that was the backbone of his entire empire. David's face drained of color. "What the hell is he doing here?" Jenna whispered, her mind racing. She had known something was wrong, but she hadn't anticipated this. She hadn't anticipated the CEO, the very man David had been working to impress, to be standing beside his wife in the middle of his own party. Jenna's stomach twisted. The truth was beginning to emerge, but it was more horrifying than she could have imagined. But then it hit her. There was more at play here than just business. This was personal. Very personal. Sarah turned to face the crowd, her voice ringing clear. "I believe you all know David," she began, her eyes now glancing at Jenna, a quiet, almost amused expression crossing her face. "But what you don't know is that tonight, we're going to settle a few things. Starting with what David's been hiding." The room went completely still. Jenna felt like the walls were closing in on her. She had been part of this world, this carefully controlled, perfect world where David was the master of everything. But tonight, it was all falling apart. What was Sarah doing? What had David done? As Sarah continued, revealing more than Jenna could handle, David remained frozen, his face betraying the shock and panic he had been trying to hide all night. The truth was about to come out. And it was going to change everything. The room remained frozen. Sarah stood tall, an aura of calm authority radiating from her, her eyes never leaving David as she took a deliberate step forward. The CEO, Henry Lawson, remained silent, his stone-cold expression adding to the mounting tension. Jenna, standing next to David, felt her pulse quicken as a wave of uncertainty washed over her. The world around her felt like it was closing in. David's hand clenched around his champagne glass, the crystal nearly shattering under the pressure. His eyes flicked between Sarah and Henry. It was as if the walls of his carefully constructed life were crumbling in an instant, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "David," Sarah began, her voice steady, though it carried an edge that cut through the silence. "You and I both know what's been going on. And I'm not here to play games anymore." David opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His throat constricted, his mind racing. He was supposed to be in control of this moment. He was supposed to be the one holding all the cards. But tonight, it was as if everything was slipping through his fingers. "Sarah, please," David said, finally managing to speak, his voice a strained whisper. This isn't what, David?" Sarah cut him off, her voice rising slightly. "You've been living a lie for months. I've been watching from the sidelines, pretending I didn't know. But tonight, I'm done pretending. It's time to expose the truth. Jenna felt a sudden chill creep up her spine. She glanced nervously at the guests standing around them, all of whom were now watching with bated breath, waiting for the bombshell that was sure to come. The air was thick with tension, as if the entire party had collectively drawn in a breath and was now waiting for something to happen. The CEO, Henry Lawson, took a step forward, his expression unreadable. He glanced at David, then back at the crowd, before speaking in a calm, measured tone that sent shivers down Jenna's spine. "You've been hiding a lot more than just an affair, David," Henry said. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth." David's eyes widened, and for the first time, his composure faltered. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Jenna's heart hammered in her chest as she turned to look at him, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Henry," David finally croaked, his voice cracking. "You don't have to do this." But it was too late. Henry's eyes locked onto David's, and he raised his hand, signaling for the room to quiet down. The guests fell into an eerie silence, the only sound now the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. "You see," Henry continued, "what David has been hiding goes beyond his personal life. It goes straight to the heart of the empire he's built. The company that made him who he is. And the truth is, it's been built on lies. Lies that could destroy everything." Jenna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just about an affair. It wasn't just about David's infidelity. There was something much darker at play here. David's face was pale now, his usually confident demeanor completely shattered. He seemed to shrink under Henry's words, as if the very foundation of his existence was being called into question. His empire, his wealth, his reputation, all of it was hanging by a thread, and it was unraveling before his eyes. "I know about the illegal deals, David," Henry said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. "I know about the shady business practices. And I know that you've been hiding them from everyone. From your investors. From your employees. From your wife. But most importantly, from yourself." The words hung in the air, each one like a bullet fired into the silence. Jenna felt as if the floor beneath her was about to give way. She had always known that David was ruthless in business, but this? This was beyond anything she had imagined. David shook his head, his eyes frantic. "This isn't what you think, Henry. I've worked hard for everything I have. Everything I've built has been through dedication and hard work. You can't just..." But Henry wasn't done. He raised a hand, silencing David's protest. "I've been patient with you, David. I've let you have your little affair. I've let you keep up the charade. But now, I'm pulling the rug out from under you. I'm not going to sit by and watch you destroy everything we've worked for." Jenna could hardly breathe as she processed what was unfolding. She glanced at the crowd, their faces a mix of shock, curiosity, and disbelief. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would change everything. "Sarah," David said, his voice breaking. "Please. Don't do this. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. Just give me a chance." But Sarah didn't seem moved. Her eyes remained cold, distant. "There's nothing to fix, David. The damage is done. The truth is out, and there's no going back." For a moment, Jenna felt as if she were watching someone she didn't recognize. This wasn't the man who had charmed her with his smile. This wasn't the confident, ruthless mogul who had promised her a life of luxury. This was a broken man, desperate and cornered. David's gaze shifted to Jenna, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something in his eyes, a mixture of fear and pleading. He reached out to her, but she took a step back, her heart heavy with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. "Jenna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You have to understand. I never wanted this to happen. It wasn't supposed to be like this." But Jenna didn't know what to say. she didn't know how to respond. Everything she thought she knew about David, everything she had believed in, was falling apart right before her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, David," she finally said, her voice trembling. "But now I don't know who you are anymore." David's face twisted in pain as he opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Sarah's voice rang out again. "It's over, David. You're done." David collapsed into a nearby chair, his hands trembling as he held his head in his hands. The room remained silent, the guests unsure of what to do next. Jenna stood there, frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. The man she had been with for months, the man who had promised her everything, was crumbling before her eyes. And she couldn't tell if she was witnessing his downfall or if she was simply another casualty of his web of lies. As David sat there, broken and defeated, Sarah turned toward the guests and raised a hand. The room slowly began to buzz with whispers and murmurs, the partygoers still processing the gravity of the situation. Jenna felt her chest tighten as she took a step back, her mind racing. What had she gotten herself into? She had been a willing participant in David's world, but now it felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching as everything she knew was about to crumble. And the worst part? She wasn't sure if she could even trust herself anymore. Had she been nothing more than a pawn in a game she hadn't fully understood? The shockwaves of David's downfall were just beginning to ripple through the room, and Jenna knew that the worst was yet to come. The room remained unervingly quiet. The guests, still in shock from the revelations, had begun to murmur in low voices, the hum of their conversations filling the once echoing silence. It felt as though time had slowed, each second stretching out, drawn thin by the weight of what had just been exposed. David sat in the chair, his back hunched as though the weight of the world had suddenly come crashing down on him. His hands were pressed to his face, the sheen of sweat on his forehead betraying the panic that was building inside him. His empire, the empire he had built through years of manipulation, power, and cunning, was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Every lie, every secret he had buried beneath layers of charm and wealth, was now coming to light, and the consequences were spiraling beyond his control. Jenna stood at the edge of the room, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of the chaotic scene unfolding before her. She had always known that there were things about David she didn't fully understand, things he had kept hidden. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. He had built a kingdom on lies, and she had been one of the many pieces in his intricate puzzle. Her mind raced as she thought back over the past few months. At first, everything had seemed perfect. David had showered her with attention, promises of a future filled with luxury and adventure. He had made her feel special, as if she were the only woman in the world who truly understood him. But now, as she stood there, watching him break down, Jenna couldn't help but wonder how much of what she had believed was a carefully constructed illusion. Sarah, still standing tall and composed, surveyed the room with a quiet authority. Her gaze swept over the guests, each of them hanging on to her every word, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. She had been silent for a few moments, allowing the tension in the air to build. Now, she turned back to face David. "You've always been a master of control, haven't you, David?" she said, her voice smooth but laced with venom. "You've controlled everything, your business, your reputation, even me. But tonight, the game is over. You don't control anything anymore." David looked up at her, his face pale and drained of all emotion. "Please, Sarah," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I can fix this." But Sarah's expression softened only for a moment, and then it turned cold once again. "It's too late for fixing, David," she said, her tone like ice. "There's nothing left to fix." Jenna watched the exchange with growing unease. She had never seen David so vulnerable, so utterly defeated. She had always thought of him as a man who could overcome anything, who would always find a way out of any situation. But now, he seemed so small, so fragile. And the worst part? She couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. Despite everything he had done, despite the lies and the manipulation, there was still a part of her that cared. Before she could process her own emotions, Sarah addressed the room again, her voice ringing out with chilling clarity. "I know all of you have questions," Sarah said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "And you're all wondering what's next. What's next for David, for his company, for all of you who have been a part of his web of deceit." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jenna felt her stomach churn as she realized that Sarah's words were not just aimed at David, they were meant for everyone. Everyone in this room had been a part of David's world, whether they knew it or not. The investments, the business deals, the secrets, no one was innocent. David's head dropped once more, his hands gripping the sides of the chair as if trying to steady himself against a storm that he knew he couldn't weather. "Tonight," Sarah continued, "we begin the process of unraveling everything. This isn't just about exposing an affair or a few bad decisions. This is about the truth, about the way David has used and manipulated everyone around him for his own gain." David raised his head, his eyes wild. "You're going to destroy everything, aren't you?" he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're going to ruin me, ruin everything I've worked for." Sarah stepped closer to him, her heels clicking against the marble floor with every step. "You did that to yourself, David," she said. "You were so consumed by your own power, so desperate to maintain control, that you lost sight of what truly mattered. And now, you're going to pay the price." Jenna could see the anguish on David's face, and a strange wave of guilt washed over her. She had never wanted this for him. She had never wanted to see him fall apart like this. But now that the truth was coming to light, there was no escaping the consequences. The lies had been too deep, too ingrained in everything he had built. Sarah turned away from David and addressed the room once more. "I've already contacted the board of directors," she said. "The company is being investigated, and there will be consequences. Legal action will be taken. All of you who have been complicit in this, who have turned a blind eye to David's actions, will be held accountable. No one will escape the fallout from this." The room fell silent once again. The weight of Sarah's words hung heavy in the air, and Jenna felt a wave of nausea hit her. She had known that David's business dealings weren't always above board, but she hadn't realized just how deep the corruption ran. He had been hiding things from everyone, not just her, not just Sarah, but from the entire world. And now, it was all unraveling. Jenna's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. She thought back to the nights she had spent with David, the moments they had shared, the promises he had made. Was it all just a lie? Had she been nothing more than a pawn in his game of manipulation? Or had there been moments of real emotion, real connection, buried beneath the surface? As she pondered these questions, Sarah turned toward her, and for the first time, their eyes met. "You," Sarah said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're part of this, too." Jenna froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected Sarah to focus all her anger on David, but this was unexpected. She could feel the weight of Sarah's gaze on her, and for a moment, she was afraid that Sarah could see right through her. "What do you mean?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. Sarah smirked, her eyes narrowing. "Don't play innocent. You've been his mistress. You've been living in this world of lies and deception just as much as he has. Don't pretend like you didn't know what you were getting into." Jenna's chest tightened. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, but the truth was, she didn't know what to say. She had been part of David's life, part of his lies, but she had never truly understood the depth of his corruption. Now, everything felt like a dream, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. David, still sitting in the chair, turned his gaze to Jenna, his eyes pleading. "Jenna, I never wanted you to be caught in this. Please, don't let her do this." But the damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. As Sarah's words continued to sink in, the reality of the situation hit Jenna with full force. The life she had thought she knew, the life she had built in her mind, was nothing more than a facade. And now, as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, she realized that she had no place left in David's world. But even as the storm raged around her, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something more to this story. Something deeper, something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. The world had stopped moving. At least, that's how it felt to Jenna as she stood in the midst of the storm she hadn't asked for, yet had been swept into. The entire evening, once filled with laughter and opulence, had turned into a cruel spectacle of exposure and devastation. The elegant mansion, once a symbol of David's grandeur and success, now felt like a prison of secrets unraveling. Jenna stood motionless, her mind racing as she tried to comprehend everything that had transpired. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to scream or just disappear. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about David, and even about the life she had come to accept, was falling apart like a house of cards. The weight of Sarah's accusations and the sudden revelation of David's illegal dealings were unbearable, and yet, the worst part was that Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, a deeper, darker truth waiting to be unearthed. David's voice broke through her chaotic thoughts. "Jenna," he whispered. His voice desperate and raw, like a man drowning. "Please. I know you're angry, but there's so much more to this. You have to understand. Sarah, she's not telling you everything." Jenna turned to look at him. He was still sitting in the chair, his face pale and drawn. His once sharp features were now softened with fear, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable, a far cry from the confident mogul she had known. His eyes, pleading and filled with regret, locked onto hers. "David," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to believe anymore. You've lied to me, and now I don't even know who you are." David flinched at her words, his head hanging low. But before he could respond, Sarah's voice sliced through the tense silence. "You should listen to her, David," Sarah said coldly, her eyes fixed on him. "She deserves the truth." David's hands trembled as he ran them through his disheveled hair. His mind was spinning. The room felt suffocating, the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him from all sides. He had never imagined his life would fall apart so completely, so suddenly. Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, was slipping through his fingers like sand. "Sarah, please," David begged again, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll fix it. I'll make things right. I swear I will." Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood there, her gaze unreadable. Then, without warning, she spoke again, her voice dark and filled with something like cold satisfaction. "There's nothing left to fix, David. The damage is done. You've destroyed everything. And now you'll have to live with the consequences." Jenna could see the way David's shoulders slumped under the weight of Sarah's words. He looked like a man who had been struck by an invisible force, his life and everything he had worked for crumbling in a matter of moments. "I don't deserve this," David said, almost as if to himself. "I've worked harder than anyone I know. I've built this empire from the ground up, and all for what? For it to come crashing down like this?" Jenna felt a twinge of sympathy. She had never been naive enough to believe that David was a saint, but there was something tragic about the way he was unraveling. For all his flaws, for all his secrets, he had truly believed he was in control, until now. And as much as she hated the way he had treated her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow for the man who had once seemed invincible. But there was no time to dwell on that. The truth had been exposed, and it was clear now that there was more at stake than just David's reputation. Sarah had made it clear that she was intent on dismantling everything David had built, and Jenna knew she couldn't ignore the possibility that she might be caught in the fallout as well. "I need to know what's going on," Jenna said, her voice firm as she turned to Sarah. "What is David hiding? What else don't I know?" For the first time that evening, Sarah seemed to hesitate. She glanced briefly at David, a flicker of something passing through her eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps something darker. But it was gone before Jenna could fully understand what it meant. "There's a lot more, Jenna," Sarah said slowly. "A lot more than you realize. You think this is just about David's affairs, don't you? You think it's about his cheating, or his lies. But this is about something much bigger. Something that goes beyond him. Something that could ruin everything he's built, and everyone who's been involved with him." Jenna's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Sarah looked around the room, as though checking to make sure no one else was listening. The guests were still murmuring, some exchanging whispers, others frozen in place, watching the scene unfold with morbid curiosity. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she took a step closer to Jenna. "David has been involved in something dangerous," she said, her voice low. "Something illegal. And I don't just mean shady business deals. I mean, criminal activity. Things that, if they ever came to light, would destroy his empire, his wealth, and anyone associated with him." Jenna's mind went numb. She had known David was ruthless in business. She had known he played hard and fast with the rules. But this? This was something else. What could possibly be so catastrophic that it threatened everything he had built? Sarah's voice dropped even further, barely a whisper now. "David is involved in money laundering, Jenna. He's been using his company as a front for illegal transactions, moving money for dangerous people, people who have connections all over the world. And if this ever gets out, it won't just ruin him, it'll ruin everyone around him." Jenna felt her legs go weak. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse. She had been a part of David's world, but she hadn't known this. She hadn't known how deep the darkness went. She had been so caught up in the allure of wealth, power, and status that she hadn't questioned anything. But now, the truth was staring her in the face. "You're lying," Jenna whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew she wasn't sure. The doubt gnawed at her, a deep, visceral fear creeping into her chest. "Why would I lie to you, Jenna?" Sarah asked, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and sadness. "Why would I destroy everything if it weren't true? Look at him, he's a man who has done unspeakable things to get what he wants. And now he's trying to drag you down with him." David's voice cracked as he spoke. "I never meant for you to get involved in this, Jenna. I never meant for you to know. But please, don't listen to her. It's not like she says. I can explain everything." But Jenna's mind was already spinning, the weight of Sarah's words sinking deeper with each passing second. The man she thought she knew, the man she had trusted, wasn't just guilty of cheating on her. He wasn't just a man hiding behind a facade of wealth and success. He was something much darker. He was involved in a world she hadn't even begun to understand. And now, she realized that she, too, had become a part of that world, whether she wanted to or not. Jenna stepped back, feeling the weight of the room close in around her. She needed answers. She needed to know if what Sarah was saying was true. But more than anything, she needed to know if there was any chance for redemption. Was there any way for her to walk away from this without being tainted by everything that had been exposed? But before she could say anything more, a loud crash echoed through the room, followed by a scream. Everyone turned, startled, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. In the corner of the room, a figure had collapsed, knocking over a table in the process. People rushed toward the commotion, and Jenna's heart skipped a beat. It was Henry Lawson, the CEO who had made the revelation earlier. He was lying on the floor, his eyes wide open, but his face was pale, his breath shallow. Something was terribly wrong. Jenna's blood ran cold. As people began to gather around Henry, trying to revive him, she couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't just a coincidence. There was something more going on. Something much darker. And it was all tied to David. The night had descended into madness. What was meant to be a celebration of wealth, power, and connections had transformed into a harrowing spectacle. The luxurious mansion, once a symbol of success and opulence, was now a battleground of deceit, betrayal, and the crumbling facade of a perfect life. The guests, who had once mingled with laughter and casual chatter, now stood frozen, their faces a mix of confusion, fear, and intrigue. And at the center of it all, David's world was falling apart. As the crowd gathered around Henry, lying unconscious on the floor, a hushed silence spread through the room. People crowded around him, some trying to revive him, others simply standing there, unsure of what to do. But Jenna could barely focus on the commotion. Her mind was racing, her thoughts like a storm she couldn't control. Sarah's words, David's involvement in money laundering, dangerous people, criminal activities, echoed in her mind like an alarm bell. Everything had changed. Everything she thought she knew was shattered. She stood frozen in place, unable to tear her gaze away from David. He stood near the periphery of the chaos, his face a mask of exhaustion and fear, his eyes darting between Sarah, Jenna, and the scene unfolding in front of them. His once confident demeanor had dissolved, leaving only a shell of the man who had controlled the room just hours before. The power he had wielded with ease was gone, replaced by something darker and more terrifying. His empire, the one he had worked his entire life to build, was unraveling, and he could do nothing to stop it. "David," Jenna said, her voice trembling but resolute, "what did you do? What is this? Who are these people?" David swallowed hard, his lips pressed tight together as he struggled to answer her. The words caught in his throat, as though he were choking on the truth. Jenna could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation in his gaze, but there was something else too. Something cold and calculating. "I didn't want you involved in this," he said, his voice hoarse. "You never should have been a part of it. But now you have to understand, there are people involved in this who won't stop until they get what they want." Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you mean? What do they want?" David shook his head, a faint, bitter smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "They want control, Jenna. Power. They'll stop at nothing to get it. And they don't care who gets hurt in the process." Suddenly, the room felt smaller, the walls pressing in on her. The questions were multiplying in her mind, too many questions, too many things she didn't understand. But as she stood there, listening to David's broken words, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Henry's body was being dragged away, a group of guests in tow, trying to help the unconscious man. Jenna watched them for a moment, feeling her stomach churn. The chaos was escalating, but there was no turning back now. She needed answers. She needed to know what kind of danger she was in. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah, who had been standing by silently, stepped closer to her. Her expression was unreadable, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "I don't know," she said flatly. "But I suspect that Henry wasn't just a victim of bad timing. I think someone's trying to silence him." Jenna's breath hitched in her chest. "Silence him? Why?" "Because Henry knows too much," Sarah said, her eyes flickering with something that resembled fear, but quickly masked by a veneer of calm. "He's been getting too close to the truth. He was asking too many questions about David's dealings with people who shouldn't be involved in this." "Who are these people?" Jenna demanded. Her voice was steady now, though her pulse was racing. "Who is David mixed up with?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze darting to David before returning to Jenna. "You really don't know, do you?" Jenna shook her head, her frustration rising. "No, I don't. All I know is that everything about this night has been a lie. You've been part of this, too, Sarah. Don't think I haven't noticed. What do you know? Tell me." Sarah sighed, and for the first time, Jenna saw the woman's usual composure crack. There was a hint of something darker behind her eyes, something that made Jenna feel as though she were on the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown. "I'm not here to protect David," Sarah said, her voice low. "I'm here to make sure the truth comes out. The whole truth. And the truth is, David's been involved with people who have no morals, no boundaries. They've been laundering money through his company for years, using his legitimate business as a cover. But that's not all. There's worse." Jenna's heart skipped a beat. "What's worse?" Sarah looked at David for a long moment, and then her gaze softened, just for a second. David's empire wasn't just built on business deals. It was built on something far more dangerous. These people, they're not just interested in money. They're involved in human trafficking. Drugs. Arms dealing. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. And if David crosses them, they won't hesitate to destroy him, and anyone associated with him. Jenna staggered back as though she had been physically struck. Human trafficking? Drugs? Arms dealing? The words felt foreign in her mouth, but the terror behind them was all too real. The world she had lived in, her world of luxury and comfort, had just crumbled into a nightmare. This wasn't just about cheating or lies. This was a criminal underworld so dark that she couldn't even begin to comprehend the full extent of it. David's face twisted in agony as he looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted you to be part of this. I never wanted you to know. I thought I could protect you. But now, you're involved. And you're not safe anymore, Jenna. None of us are." Jenna felt a chill wash over her. It was as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, and she was falling into an abyss she couldn't escape. The man she had trusted, loved, was at the center of a dangerous, web-like network that could crush anyone who got in its way. But even as the weight of his words sank in, a new thought began to creep into her mind. Was this all just a game? Was David the mastermind of this entire operation? Or had he been ensnared, just as she had been, by forces far greater than he had anticipated? Suddenly, a loud crash from across the room snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned to see a figure stumbling into the room, panting heavily, eyes wide with panic. It was one of the guests, a man she recognized from the board of directors, Eric, a close associate of David's. He was sweating profusely, his suit disheveled, and there was a wild look in his eyes. "David! Sarah!" he shouted, his voice shaky. "They're here." Jenna's heart skipped a beat. "Who? Who's here?" "The ones you've been hiding from." Eric gasped, his breath coming in short, frantic bursts. "They're outside the gates. They're coming for us. We're not safe here. None of us are safe." David's face went ashen. No, this can't be happening," he muttered to himself. He took a step forward, as if to run, but his legs buckled beneath him. "They're here. They've finally come for me." Jenna looked at Sarah, her mind racing. "What does this mean? What do we do?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the door, her expression unreadable. "We run," she said finally. "We don't have a choice. We need to leave. Now." David, still shaking, nodded weakly. "They've found us. And there's no escaping now." The tension in the mansion was unbearable. The once grand halls now felt like a labyrinth of impending doom. Each shadow, every creak of the floorboards, each gust of wind outside the windows seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The stakes had never been higher. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest, her pulse thundering in her ears. The very air felt thick, as though it were suffocating her. David stood at the center of the room, his face a mask of desperation and fear. His eyes darted between Sarah, Jenna, and the distant windows, as though expecting an army of shadowy figures to appear at any moment. The truth was clear now, though it was a bitter pill to swallow. The life he had built, the empire of wealth and power, was built on corruption. And worse still, those he had trusted were now at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. As Eric had shouted earlier, "They're here." It was no longer just a metaphor or a threat, it was reality. The people David had spent years associating with, people who trafficked in the most horrific of human crimes, were closing in. They knew about David's growing instability, his increasingly erratic behavior, and now they were prepared to settle the score. The mansion that had been a fortress for years was no longer a safe haven. It was a target, and the walls were closing in. Jenna felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead as she tried to process what was happening. The man she had loved, the man she had believed was a visionary, was a criminal. He had been involved in a world so dark, so insidious, that it had the power to destroy everything he had worked for, everything she had known. And yet, despite the truth crashing down around them, there was something in her that still clung to the hope that it wasn't too late, that there might be a way out. She turned to Sarah, who had been eerily calm throughout the chaos. Her eyes were fixed on the door, her jaw clenched tightly. Sarah was no longer the woman she had once thought of as a rival. Now, she seemed like a survivor, a woman who had lived through horrors Jenna couldn't even imagine. "What now?" Jenna asked, her voice shaking. "What do we do?" Sarah exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "We leave, and we leave fast. David, we're running out of time. We need to go now." David's head snapped up at the sound of his name. "I can't leave. I've spent my life building this. This is everything I've worked for." His voice cracked with the weight of his regret and the destruction that now loomed over him. Jenna stepped toward him, a firm resolve settling in her chest. "It's gone, David. It's over. The life you've been holding onto isn't real anymore. The people you've been running with, they're coming for you. We need to survive. We need to get out of here." David's eyes flickered between her and the window, his expression tormented. But in that moment, something in his demeanor shifted. A flicker of understanding passed through him, and it was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He knew she was right. He knew that whatever he had thought he was protecting, it was no longer worth fighting for. "I never wanted you to be a part of this," he murmured, more to himself than to Jenna. "I thought I could protect you from all of this. But I was wrong." "David, we don't have time to talk," Sarah said, her voice sharp with urgency. "They're already here. They've been watching us. If we don't move now, we're done." Before anyone could respond, the sound of screeching tires echoed from outside the mansion. A car's engine roared to life, and the sound of doors slamming shut sent a wave of panic through the room. "They're here," Sarah hissed, her eyes wide with fear. "Move now." Jenna grabbed David's arm, her grip tight, as though trying to anchor him to reality. She knew that if they didn't leave now, they might never get another chance. But David was still frozen, his mind seemingly paralyzed by the weight of what he had done. "David," she said, pulling him with her toward the back door. "You're not alone in this. You don't have to do this alone. We'll figure this out. But we need to move now." Finally, David broke free of his daze. With a deep, ragged breath, he nodded and followed her, his steps heavy as they moved toward the rear exit. Sarah was already ahead, moving with the precision of someone who had been in similar situations before. She was calm, collected, her face a mask of purpose. Jenna could feel the tension in the air as they rushed through the back halls, past the elegant rooms that now seemed so alien. The wealth and grandeur that had once defined this place now seemed like a distant memory. The people they had once been, David, Jenna, Sarah, were all different now. This night had shattered everything. They reached the back door, but as they stepped into the garden, they froze. Standing at the gate, shrouded in shadows, were two men. Tall, broad-shouldered, and menacing, they seemed to appear out of nowhere. They were dressed in dark suits, their faces obscured by the darkness, but their presence was unmistakable. Jenna's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively stepped closer to David. The men didn't move, but their eyes were fixed on the trio, as though they knew exactly who they were waiting for. Sarah's face hardened. "It's too late," she said, her voice low but steady. "They're here for David. They know what he's done. And they'll do anything to make sure it stays hidden." David's body went rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For the first time, Jenna saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, raw, unfiltered fear. "What do we do?" Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. Before Sarah could answer, one of the men stepped forward, his hands raised in a slow, deliberate motion. "We've been looking for you, David," the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. "It's over." David's breath caught in his throat. "You don't understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't." The man cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Save your apologies. We don't need them. You've made your bed. Now you lie in it." Jenna stepped forward, her body tense, her mind racing. She had no idea who these men were or what they wanted, but it was clear that David's past had caught up with him in the worst possible way. "Let him go," Jenna demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "You can't just do this. You can't take him." The man's eyes flickered toward her, his gaze cold and disinterested. "And who are you to tell us what we can and can't do? Step aside." But Jenna didn't move. There was something inside her, something primal, that refused to let these men take David. She didn't know what she was capable of in this moment, but she couldn't let them destroy him, not without a fight. "Jenna," David murmured, his voice shaking. "We can't win this. They'll kill us." For a split second, Jenna considered running. But then she remembered everything David had done, the pain, the betrayal, the lies, and something inside her snapped. She couldn't run from this. Not anymore. Not without a fight. The man in front of them smirked, clearly enjoying the tension. "You really think you can stop this? You don't know who you're dealing with." Jenna's eyes flickered toward Sarah. There was a moment of unspoken understanding between them. Sarah had been here before. She had survived this. "Get ready," Sarah said, her voice cold. "It's not over yet." And then, everything changed. There was a sudden sound, a shrill, echoing whistle. A car door slammed in the distance, and headlights illuminated the garden. A sleek, black SUV skidded to a halt, and before the men could react, the back door opened, revealing a new figure.